If your blood type is O positive, you are not just carrying a label on a medical bracelet. You are carrying a survival record, one written by disease, migration, starvation, and war, not the humankind, the invisible kind. A record older than any language, any nation, any border ever drawn on a map. For most of modern medicine's history, your blood type was treated like a footnote, a letter and a symbol, useful for one thing only, making sure a transfusion didn't kill you. Nobody thought there was a story hiding inside it. Then geneticists actually went looking, and what they found flips almost everything people assumed about O-positive blood upside down, including which blood type came first, why nearly an entire continent of humans ended up sharing it, and the deadly trade-off buried inside your own cells that you've probably never heard of. By the end of this video, you'll never look at a blood test the same way again. In 1901, an Austrian scientist named Karl Landsteiner was staring through a microscope trying to solve something genuinely terrifying. Nobody understood why blood transfusions sometimes saved a patient's life and other times killed them almost instantly. Landsteiner discovered the answer. Mix certain blood samples together and they stayed smooth. Mix others and they clumped violently, like the blood itself was rejecting the intruder. He just identified human blood groups A, B, and O, a discovery that eventually earned him a Nobel Prize and made transfusions survivable for the first time in history. But almost immediately, researchers made a lazy assumption. They looked at Europe, saw type A everywhere, and decided type A must be humanity's original blood type, the ancestral default, with type O dismissed as some kind of later mutation. They had it exactly backwards. Decades later, when scientists could finally read the actual gene behind blood type sitting quietly on chromosome 9, they started mapping frequencies across the entire planet. And the pattern that emerged wasn't subtle. Europe leaned heavily toward type A. Parts of northern India leaned hard toward type B. But when researchers tested indigenous populations across the Americas groups, whose ancestors had been isolated from the rest of the world for tens of thousands of years, type O numbers were almost unbelievable. In some communities, essentially everyone carried it. Not most people, nearly all of them. In genetics, that's not a coincidence. It's called a founder effect when a small original population carries a specific trait, and every descendant inherits it because there was no one else to mix with. It meant the very first people who crossed into the Americas were carrying an overwhelming amount of type O blood, and they passed it down unchanged for thousands of years. So where did those original travelers actually come from? Every strand of evidence, ancient skeletons, mitochondrial DNA, the genetic markers surrounding the O gene itself, points to the same origin. Ancestors who crossed out of Asia, surviving a brutal land bridge that once connected Siberia to Alaska during the last ice age. And that Asian reservoir of type O genetics is still enormous today. In the Philippines, roughly 45% of the population carries it. In Vietnam, it sits close to 42%. Trace the tiny genetic fingerprints around the O gene in modern populations across the globe, and they lead directly back into the deep prehistoric landscape of Asia, which raises the real question: why did this particular blood type survive so aggressively, spreading across an entire hemisphere while other types stayed comparatively rare in the same populations? The answer has almost nothing to do with the cold of the Ice Age. It has everything to do with a war you can't see. Throughout human history, the deadliest threat humans ever faced wasn't other humans. It was microscopic. Plagues, parasites, and bacteria killed more people than every war in history combined, and your blood type turns out to be one of the actual battlefields. Take malaria. For hundreds of thousands of years, it's been one of humanity's most efficient killers. The parasite invades red blood cells and uses molecular structures on their surface to spread. Type O cells are smoother missing those extra structures, which means the parasite has a much harder time gaining a foothold. Clinical research has repeatedly found that people with type O blood have significantly better odds of surviving a severe malaria infection. Now add norovirus, the brutal stomach bug behind entire cruise ships being quarantined. Certain strains need to physically latch onto molecules found specifically in type A and type B blood to infect the digestive tract. Type O blood is missing that exact lock. So in many documented outbreaks, type O carriers walked through heavily contaminated environments virus and simply didn't get sick. Across thousands of years, an invisible shield against two of humanity's most persistent killers isn't luck. It's a genuine survival advantage, and it's a major reason ancient populations pushing out of Asia through disease-heavy tropical regions carried so much type O blood with them. They didn't choose it. They survived because of it, generation after generation. But evolution never gives you a gift without attaching a bill. The same smooth, simplified cell structure that helps type O carriers dodge malaria leaves other doors wide open. Cholera is one of them. In regions like the Ganges Delta, where cholera outbreaks have devastated populations for centuries, researchers found that the cholera toxin binds far more efficiently to type O cells. During major outbreaks, people with type O blood suffered dramatically worse, more life-threatening dehydration than people with other blood types. It's very likely one of the reasons type O is comparatively rare in parts of India, where cholera has been a constant, brutal presence. The local disease environment quite literally shaped the blood type of the people who survived it. There's also a much more common, everyday cost: stomach ulcers. People with type O blood carry a notably higher lifetime risk, largely tied to a corkscrew-shaped bacterium called H. pylori, which seems to thrive specifically in the biological environment a type O stomach provides. And if you want a smaller, more irritating trade off, mosquitoes. In controlled studies where volunteers exposed their arms to hungry mosquitoes, type O carriers got bitten almost twice as often as type A carriers. Your blood is, in a very literal sense, advertising itself as the preferred meal. Type O isn't a flawless superpower. It's a trade protection against some of history's worst killers, in exchange for vulnerability to others. That's what real evolution looks like. Never a perfect design, always a compromise shaped by whatever threat was actually trying to kill you. Just when scientists thought they had type O fully mapped, one hospital case in 1952 broke the entire model. A patient in Bombay, now Mumbai, needed a transfusion and tested as type O. Doctors gave them standard type O blood. The patient's body violently rejected it. Nobody could explain how type O could reject type O. The answer, once researchers dug deeper, was strange enough to rewrite the textbook. Think of blood type structure like a house. Types A and B are the roof, built on top of a basic foundation molecule called the H antigen. Type O blood still has that foundation, it just never builds a roof on top. But this patient didn't even have the foundation. Under a basic test, it looked identical to type O. Genetically, it was something else entirely. This became known as the Bombay phenotype people, who can only safely receive blood from other Bombay donors. Globally, it appears in roughly 1 in a million people. In parts of the Indian subcontinent, it's dramatically more common, closer to 1 in 10,000. It's a reminder that even inside a story as sweeping as type O conquered the world, there are ancient, hyper-local chapters that a routine blood test doesn't even have the vocabulary to detect. Zoom out far enough, and the journey of this blood type turns into one of the most impressive migration stories in human history. Around 5,000 years ago, long after the Ice Age land bridges had vanished underwater, seafarers from what's now Taiwan looked out at the open Pacific and decided to cross it anyway. Using outrigger canoes and generations of accumulated navigational knowledge, they reached Hawaii, they reached New Zealand, they reached Easter Island, some of the most remote inhabited places on Earth. And in nearly every Polynesian population descended from those voyages. Modern DNA testing shows the same spike in type O blood, which means two of the most geographically isolated human populations on the planet, indigenous communities in the Americas. And Polynesian islanders scattered across the deep Pacific carry the same ancient Asian genetic signature. Despite being separated by an entire ocean, neither population could have known existed. The water didn't erase that inheritance. It carried it, along with everything else, to the far edges of the map. Even today, that ancient blueprint still shapes daily biology. O-positive blood tends to be naturally thinner, with somewhat lower levels of certain clotting proteins, which generally means a lower lifetime risk of dangerous blood clots and some cardiovascular blockages. The trade-off: if you get a deep cut, you may bleed a little longer than someone with a different blood type. Every single trait folded into that letter and symbol is an echo of an environment your ancestors had no choice but to survive. So the next time you glance at a medical chart and see O positive, don't read it as a chemical category. Read it as a survival medal, forged over tens of thousands of years by people who crossed frozen land bridges, endured malaria-soaked jungles, survived plagues that erased entire bloodlines around them, and somehow kept going anyway. Their bodies adapted. Their descendants crossed oceans that shouldn't have been crossable with the tools they had. And that exact inheritance quietly, patiently, made its way all the way down to you. You're not just carrying a blood type. You're carrying the oldest, most detailed record your family will ever have, written in a language science only recently learned to read. If this changed how you think about something as ordinary as a blood test, drop your blood type in the comments, along with where in the world your family history traces back to. I want to see how far this story actually spreads. See you in the next video.